Hello, and welcome to Speaking of Supply Chain, where we explore trends, current events, and innovations impacting the logistics and supply chain industries. I am your host, Ellen Wood. Today, I am joined by Jay Jackson, and we're talking about large transformations inside organizations and what tactics can mitigate the disruptions that a large transformation typically causes. Jay, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me, Alan. Appreciate you.
So Jay is with Miebach Consulting as well. He is a manager, a change management manager. That's a little
It's a
bit of an
bit of a
alliteration
mouthful.
there. Yeah, mouthful. And you're also an adjunct professor at SNHU,
Yes.
Southern New Hampshire University. So tell us a little bit more about what it is that you do.
So I guess in a nutshell, I try to help our organizations and our clients with change management, organizational behavior. I kind of jokingly tell clients and our colleagues that I'm kind of like a organizational psychologist, if you will. I'm a business therapist. So, but I really try to help work with our clients and our own colleagues, in fact, with how to go about change. We're always changing something, and those changes can be very minor to something that's very impactful. Maybe it can even impact, your livelihood or fundamentally how you perform your work today. So, really helping individuals navigate those types of, roller coasters in their life and those, difficulties. Everybody deals with change differently, and so we've come to appreciate there's both a science and an art to how you can help support and navigate individuals. I guess as a professor, I teach a host of topics in supply chain and operations management. So those can be from, you know, the fundamentals of, air transportation or to, again, organizational topics like leadership and team management, or
Mhm.
I'm teaching a class right now actually on sustainability and the triple bottom line effect. So those are some of the courses that I also teach for SNHU and some other universities.
Fantastic. Well, I am looking forward to our topic today. I'm sure you have a whole lot to say on organizational transformations. But first, before we get started, let's talk about something a little off topic. What
Yeah,
is, I know you travel
yeah.
with Miebach, but also just personally, you love to travel. So, what is the favorite place, like the absolute best place you've ever traveled and why?
Yeah, I would say as you mentioned, I've been all over the world between Europe and South America and whatnot. So I would say though my favorite place though to have visited would have been Edinburgh, Scotland.
One of my bucket list places as well. So, yeah, what was awesome about Edinburgh?
There's just so much culture there, and the time of year that I went, it was actually a little bit chillier out, and I love the fall weather,
Hmm.
and seeing things like King Arthur's Mountain was just a very beautiful scenery, and at the time didn't really know, but unfortunately since the Queen's death, come to find out as well that Edinburgh was also one of her favorite cities to have visited, and so the castle, her castle that was there, we had
Uh,
visited as well.
is that Balmoral?
Uh,
That's,
yeah.
I think it
One of them.
is.
I can't. Yeah, I can't. Whichever one it was, I can never remember which one. But whichever one it was, it's just a very beautiful city, very cultured, and one of the cool things that we did there with our kids was we took them to this like magical kind of like imitation room, if you will, and
Okay.
it was really neat. It was really cool. It's like a children's museum kind of a deal, but like it had different like mazes and just different mirrored rooms and whatnot. So absolutely loved it. Absolutely loved the countryside up there.
What time of year did you go?
So when I actually lived in England for a bit of time, and so that was during the fall months. So it must have
Mm,
been like October or so, October, November.
okay. Well, I have never been to Scotland. It is on my bucket list. One of my favorite book series, and I'm actually reading it right now, is the Outlander series. And so
Oh yeah,
I watched the TV show. I love it. I've read the books multiple times. I'm reading one right now. And so I'm constantly transported into that imaginary Scotland. And I've always wanted to go. And ever since I've been a fan of this particular author, I've wanted to go even more. So it's on my husband's and my bucket list to get there to do a whiskey tour and visit some
yeah.
castles.
I've done the whiskey tour as well. It's super amazing. I've got even some of here in my office. I've got some of the glassware from that trip. So that the whiskey experience is a really cool museum.
But so mine, because I haven't been there, I can't say that that's one of the favorite places that I've traveled, but mine would be actually Italy and Rome, for some similar reasons. The history that's there,
Yeah.
all of the culture, and being able to see things that are thousands of years old. I remember when we went so my mother-in-law taught Latin as her profession and would take school trips. That's something that's very common in the US, is if you're taking a foreign language, to take a school trip to that country of origin for the language and visit and immerse yourself in the culture. And my husband and I chaperoned one of those school trips to Italy, and we went all over Italy, from Milan all the way down to Capri and everywhere in between. And there were 1,000 wonderful memories of that trip. But one of the funniest was when we went to the Colosseum. So my husband had been on multiple of these trips throughout his
Uh-huh.
life. He's been 5 or 6 times to Italy with his mom on this school trip, and they've done the tours and they're guided and you get to see all these things. He's been to the Colosseum multiple times. This was my first time going. And when we get there, they have all these Roman soldiers dressed up in costume, and you get to take your picture with them. And the Roman soldier usually just stays in costume, but for this particular picture, he offered me to hold his sword. And my husband was in the picture just kind of glaring because he wanted to hold the sword and I got to. He'd never been able to. No one had ever offered that to
Yeah.
him before. And it was
Yeah.
my first time, and I got to hold the sword. He was so salty about it. It's a funny picture, and we laugh about it every time we see it in the photo album. My kids think it's hilarious. Yeah, that he was grumpy and disappointed that he didn't
I
get to
can
hold
imagine.
the sword while we were at the Colosseum. But it's so interesting to be there in the middle of it, and the forum just across the way, the Roman Forum, in the middle of downtown Rome. It's so fun. We don't have that kind of history here in the US. Our country is so much younger than the European country's history. So we don't have quite that that type of experience here. All right. Well, on to our actual topic today, which
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
large scale transformations and the impact that they can cause and how to kind of mitigate that. So, when we're talking about a transformation, we've established that change is difficult and everyone experiences the change differently. What makes a transformation large? I mean, is there a dollar amount?
Yeah. No, it's an interesting question, right? And so to kind of be a little technical here for a hot second. So, Gartner defines transformations, if you will. Supply chain transformations refers to technological innovation and digitalization of an organization's supply chain.
Mhm.
You know, in a nutshell, though, I like to just kind of simplify that and just say, what are we going to do differently tomorrow than what we're doing today?
Mhm.
Hopefully, in an efforts for efficiency gains, or to, again, make the organization better. But what defines, again, large versus small, it really comes down to that organization and to that organization's culture.
Mhm.
um, there are organizations today that are worth billions of dollars that, making a simple change could derail the whole organization. It could cause employees to think about working from home, for instance, right? Like something like
Mhm.
that can cause it doesn't matter if you're a large scale $1 billion organization, or you're a mom and pop operation.
Mhm.
A change can, whether you prepared and weathered for the storm, a change like remote working could have been something as a blip on the radar to, again, seriously, almost like life impacting, business impacting, the survivability of your own organization. So every change, it's in the eyes of the beholder, if you will, and that's where we will work with organizations to help define for them what type of a change is this, because every change is different, and how we as individuals and how organizations handle that change is different.
And you bring up a good point. I mean, that's just one example, the work from home, but that makes a huge impact on a business. For the individual, it's as simple as, do I put on fancy clothes and go into an office today, or do I stay in my pajama pants and, just get my work done and, knock it out from my home office?
Yeah.
And for a lot of individuals, that's such a small thing, but when it comes to the company itself, that makes a big difference on how they operate. If they have to maintain office suites, if they continue to pay out large sums of money to have an office for employees to go to, if employees prefer to work from home, or if that's getting to be an expectation that they don't have to go into an office, companies can save money by not having to have an office suite in certain locations. So you make an excellent point that it could be huge or it could be small, and a lot of that depends on the perspective, whether it's from the company's perspective or the individual's perspective, whether it's large or small.
And just to continue further elaborating on this point and using this as our example here, as I said, Gartner says that transformation involves technological innovation. And what we're doing here right now on this recording and on this podcast is a technological innovation, to organizations. And every day something new is coming out, whether it be in social media. Think of the advent of the email. That was a huge change for businesses and organizations, just like the advent of the wheel was for our earlier cavemen and women who are out there, right? So we're always constantly changing how we interact with each other, social media, communication. These technological changes they're fast coming, if you will. I was watching something earlier today, and it's talking about how even our data is the new gold.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Things are changing all the time, and again, for what we do, we don't come in and say this is a large or small transformation. We try to come in and understand from their perspective what
Mm-hmm.
type of a transformation this is for them.
Mm-hmm. So in these transformations, we talked about how it's a change, it's drastic, and it can cause disruption. So what's a realistic worst case scenario for a disruption? I mean, honestly, or I should say truthfully, a worst case scenario is obviously the transformation completely fails and it doesn't go through. But realistically, what signifies success versus not success?
Well, again, the true consultant answer, it depends. But but just as an example, some changes involve, human interaction. So worst case scenario would be something like, the loss of life would be a very worst case scenario, which a lot of companies are implementing changes that, for safety or health reasons could impact someone's life. I guess in a normal business context, or in a maybe more
Typical,
quote
yeah.
unquote typical, thank you, business context, losing customers, damage to your brand and reputation is a huge worst case scenario, right? When you lose the
Absolutely.
people who are paying for your products or paying for your service, you're no longer in business. And then again, the livelihood, the life of
Yeah.
your business is ceased to exist. So those are worst case scenarios. And if you don't get it right, and when I say you don't get it right, it could be any little thing. It could be the communication of the changes. It could be, yes, the implementation of the changes. It could be poor planning. It could be a whole host of things. One small pebble can cause the whole thing to fall apart.
That's terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so a small disruption might be, okay, this is, everybody's grumpy for a week, or the email's down for a day. I know we're going through some IT, transitions right now, and one of our systems is going to be down for 24 hours. It's an inconvenience. It's not ideal, obviously, at the at any time, but at certain times of the year, that can be a small problem versus a catastrophic problem.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
when you put it that way, that small thing could have that snowball effect to bring things completely to a halt is terrifying for businesses. So are there any vertical market implications? Like, does a transformation, is it easier in some industries versus others? Are there types of businesses that are able to go through these types of disruptions?
I would say yes. Some companies and some industries are disruptors in themselves. Their whole purpose is to disrupt. So,
Okay.
um, and so I would say like let's think about like our IT industries and our software industries, right? They're constantly always supposed to be pushing the bounds.
True.
They're always constantly supposed to be trying something different, doing something new. I will say that yes, some industries are better prepared for changes, and that could be due to regulatory reasons. That could be due to they're better, even though they might be competitors, they're better at collaboration and sharing of information, if you will.
Hmm.
And then there's some industries where they're still stuck in the Stone Ages, for lack of better terminology, right? And simply implementing a new IT system or a new process change, again, it could be catastrophic if it's not well prepared and not well thought through. And actually, going towards that and jumping back to what we were just talking about as well, as part of these disruptions, part of this proper planning, you should be doing things like risk mitigation and risk management
Hmm.
planning. Risk management planning is a huge thing that's really coming up these days, if you will, in conversations and topics, because we've come into situations that no one ever thought was ever possible, i.e., COVID,
Yeah.
or another really recent real world example is a ship getting stuck in the Suez Canal. If you remember that.
I do.
That debacle and tragedy, well, not tragedy, but incident that happened a couple of months ago. Um, People weren't prepared for that, right? And that disruption completely then changed
It did.
how products got to the market.
I mean, that wasn't a transformation that they were planning on. That was
No,
those were unexpected. But to your point, when something is changing that is going to change and that is going to be different, you have to look for those. Okay, what if situations? What if this goes wrong? What if this happens? What's the worst case scenario? What could happen? And if it does, what are we going to do about it? And that's the heart of risk mitigation.
and it's hard because you kind of have to think of doomsday, if you will, like what's the worst case scenario that could happen, right? But then you put in proper plans and guardrails in place, if you will, to do your best to prevent that from happening, right?
Hmm.
Uh, and so along with that also comes the ability for individuals to feel um, what's called psychological safety. So basically feeling comfortable bringing up concerns, bringing up issues. Again, large transformations have led to certain disasters because employees didn't feel comfortable, calling out and saying, "Hey, we see something wrong over here."
Right.
So,
Yeah. That they feel they didn't have a voice. It reminds me
yeah,
of a saying, proper planning prevents poor performance. And,
yes,
there's some alliteration there. There's some variations on that theme. But, when it comes to those large transformations, and again, large being subjective here, that you do need to look for those potential pitfalls in order to plan around them, plan for them. Even if you can't avoid it, okay, obviously avoiding it is the best case scenario. Let's avoid this problem. But if it's staring you in the face, you should have a plan for what are we going to do about it.
yes. And as the famous Mike Tyson said, right, we all have a plan until we get punched in the face, right?
And that
But the point is,
happens.
it happens. But the point is, you have a plan.
Yes. Or a backup plan or a backup plan, all the
Yeah.
way from plan A to plan Z of,
Yep.
what are we going to do if then, if then scenarios for
Yeah.
if this happens, then we're going to do this. Or, okay, so what are some things that you'd like our listeners to think about when they are considering their own transformations. We know that a lot of the listeners have a transformation already planned for, this new year, or they've obviously, as we continue to grow, everyone's going to have a transformation at some point. So what are some things to consider or look out for when they're looking to create that plan, that risk mitigation?
Well, I think when they're not even just risk mitigation, but I guess when they're looking to undertake their next transformation, I guess that's the question, right? What should companies look
Yeah.
for when they're looking for the next transformation? Well,
Yeah.
I would say that the first thing is the facts.
Okay.
Number one is to speak with the facts, speak with transparency. It's important to create a sense of urgency, as we've come to appreciate and learn in transformations. But you don't want to be the quote unquote boy who cries wolf, right?
True.
Because then that will lose trust. And once you've lost trust in a transformation, it's very difficult to gain that trust back. So being factual, being transparent, that does not mean that you have to lay all your cards out on the table. But that does mean that maybe you have to then explain why you can't. And that even can be as simply as, I just cannot talk about it. It's confidential. I don't really know, right? But at least you stick to being factual, right? You stick to being transparent.
And keeping those lines of communication open with the individuals who are going to be affected by that change.
Exactly, right? Building that honesty, building that trust is so important. I'd say the next thing from my standpoint is building a very strong and diverse team of both executors and influencers. We've come to understand in team building that you can't have everybody who's all A players. That's actually not beneficial for the team, because what you find then is, they start to trample on top of each other to see who's going to be the number one, right? So you got to have a good diverse team of individuals who are good at communication, good at execution, good at decision making, and good at like thought process, right? That diverse team of individuals then brings together, I like to think of it like the Justice League. If you think of, superheroes standpoint, everybody, Batman was rich and Superman had, was Man of Steel
powers,
had powers, right? And, Wonder Woman brought the lasso of truth and all her strengths and abilities. So you got to have a very diverse team of individuals who can help with this transformation, because you're going to leverage those members of the team.
Well, and they're also going to bring their different perspectives to the situation.
Absolutely. And that's extremely important. Your perspective on the situation is going to be different. You're absolutely right. And so helping individuals to see different angles of a situation is so important. And I'd say my last, recommendation is you got to be a good active listener. And that means both internally and externally. You've got to be good at good active listening. You got to have strong emotional intelligence, right? And know that, too often leadership thinks that they always have all the answers. And in reality, they don't. And layering back off the first 2 points of having a strong and diverse team and building in facts, this is where active listening is so important, because, again, your perspective could be different than reality. Mm-hmm. And that's a detriment when your perspective is different than reality.
It's going to set the transformation up for failure.
Yes. So it's so important to actively listen, to actively, process what the other individual on the other side of the table is trying to convey to you, right? That doesn't mean you have to agree with it, but it just means you have to just actively listen, and then acknowledge that person, that they were heard, mm-hmm. right? So I would say those, in a nutshell, real quickly, those would be my quick starting points to help an organization out.
So do you think when it comes to those pitfalls, those typical pitfalls in transformations, do you think that I would say the risk is mainly when it comes to getting the individuals, the people on board and behind the change? Or is it usually something, technical regarding the change itself? Changes can be anything. We've talked about a number of different ones, but is it in the operational, in the execution of the change itself, or is it in the team that has to live the change that has the higher risk?
I'm a people person, so I would always lean more towards the people. Mm-hmm. Change again, change is just very hard for individuals, and everybody reacts to change just completely differently. And so I would say the biggest risk is losing then your buy-in
Mm-hmm.
of your stakeholders. And your stakeholders can be above or below you, right? Stakeholders is not a rank or a title uh, at
Just because
all.
you're in the C-suite doesn't mean that you're a stakeholder there.
And just because you're not in the C-suite does not mean you're not a quote unquote stakeholder.
Okay.
Everybody is a stakeholder, internal and external. And you
Mm-hmm.
have to monitor and understand what's important to each of your individual stakeholders, both on the individual level and on the group level. So,
Okay.
when I say the group level, groupings of your customers versus your employees, maybe versus your management team, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, and we're talking very high level about change and transformation. It could be, something as simple as, previously when we were talking about working from home, and that could be any industry, it could be any situation. It has absolutely nothing to do with supply chain. That's just being a professional adult. It could be an IT transformation, like an email platform or a CRM that's being changed. Again, that has
Yeah.
nothing to do with supply chain and everything to do with just being in business. But when we're talking about supply chain specifically, we can think of things like, implementing automation or, adjusting your network to include a new node. All of those types of things are very large transformations. And I think that's where we're really kind of leading this, is that transformations can be small, obviously, or they can be huge in terms of that individual business and what they're trying to accomplish in their growth pattern, in their growth strategy.
Yeah, and I was just gonna just comment real quick. I mean, think about getting a package next day, right?
Oh,
And being able to track that package, on your phones. Again, going back to just every time we get a new phone, you have to there's a change. You have to learn the new features and the new
you have to transfer all your data.
security. Yeah, right. And so, but also from my phone, I can track my package and I can track my containers that are on a ship. I can track my people and their movements, right?
Hmm.
Whether you're delivery drivers or your people are out out in the community doing something,
Hmm.
whatever. I could track them on my phone. So yes, there's just these technological innovations just are, to some people they can handle that like that. To some people it's earth shattering. Think about the person who went from the typewriter to the computer. It's a completely different system thing. So
And so when we're talking about specifically supply chain transformations and some of these larger initiatives, the basics don't change. The fundamentals don't change. Of you need to be prepared, you need to have a well thought out plan, you need to understand the scope of the transformation and who is going to be affected and how they're going to be affected and what potential risks there are to those individuals. And when it's a small change, that's probably a quicker evaluation or preparation. But when it's a larger scale change, that's a completely different ballgame in terms of how many stakeholders there are, and this the potential for risks or the potential for pitfalls.
yes, yep.
All right. So, do you have a success or horror story of a transformation?
I would say I'll go with a success, if you will.
Okay.
And this was bringing in a lot of the elements that we just talked about. And this client there in Canada, they were transitioning from their old third party logistics service provider, if you will, who did their warehousing and distribution efforts, and they
Hmm.
were going to a new larger, well known, if you will, third party logistics provider in the area.
Okay. So, a very basic thing, changing a service provider, and that's it.
Yeah, yeah, changing your
Okay.
service provider. Yeah, changing your service
Okay.
provider. And in some instances, maybe not even changing the building. In this instance, we were changing the buildings that the products were stored within, and this was a retail, client. Um, and so some of the things that at first, what's always interesting and what's always fun for me is when you come in and you say, look, we're going to do stakeholder analysis, we're going to do risk management planning, et cetera, people's eyes gloss over. And they hate coming to those, initially they hate coming to those workshops. But
Yeah.
then once they realize, and this is where I also tell other change managers and other facilitators, do your best to make it fun and interactive, right?
Okay.
Because when you can then make these workshops, somewhat bearable for people to come to, right? then at the end of it, they actually say to themselves, not only do we actually do have a plan here, but this actually wasn't terrible. And those are some of our greatest success stories when the client says, we really appreciated it. At first we kind of didn't believe this was necessary, right? We thought this was a waste of time, but in reality, it was really good that we did do this because we then, when something came up, we had those plans in place, ready to enable.
Right. They were expecting torture and they got a pleasant experience instead.
Correct. And so we don't just say these things as buzzwords. Like, we really do need to do a risk management analysis and plan. We really do need to do a stakeholder analysis at the beginning of a project, so you can learn more about individuals and learn more about the groups of teams and how is the best way to interact with them. Again, this is not just something we just check in the box and just say, yeah, we're going to go interview people. No, we actually take that information, we take those notes, we take it back and we digest. What did we learn, right? What did we hear? What did we see? And then we use that information to better design the transformation.
So things go smoother when there is the full plan in place. Now, that doesn't mean that it's perfect. That doesn't mean that nothing is going to go wrong. But everything has that at least potential for success when everything is planned out properly. Again, the proper planning prevents poor performance.
Yes.
Is there a situation that you know of, maybe not one of your projects or case studies, but can you think of a time when that change went so horribly wrong that it did result in that death, and I'm using air quotes for all of our audio listeners, death of, loss of business, loss of trust in the public market? Is there a case study or a story that you know of where a transformation went so horribly awry that it had that terrible result?
Let me think about that real quick here. So,
one I can think of, and it's typically a product launch. So that's a change to offer a new product out there and, put all of your expectations for that year's sales into a new product launch and not perhaps understanding the market itself, not doing the due diligence there. I'm old enough that I think of Crystal Pepsi. If you remember that from the early 90s, they thought it was, going to be such a great product, and it had a little bit of a blip, but then it ultimately fell flat.
Yeah.
And, those types of things where they thought it was going to be a great change. They thought it was going to be a great introduction of a new product, and it didn't go well.
What popped into my head immediately when you said that was very public, if you will, and regardless of what side of the balance you fall on it. Something I remember just most recently was like if you remember that website launch for the Affordable Health Care Act many years ago.
Yes,
right?
In the U.S.
Yes, in the U.S., right? And that overloaded the servers. How many people, they weren't expecting many people, the volume of individuals to come in and sign up, right? And so, whichever way you view it, you were able to spin it in your direction. However, if you look at it, that was not a successful launch, if you will, because the website went down. However, there was a lot of learnings that came from it. And that's also a big thing, by the way, Ellen, I want to highlight here is when transformations do fail, it's important to document the reasons why they failed, those lessons learned. That way you can take that information for when your next transformation comes along. It's important to document lessons learned for when transformations are successful and they fail, but particularly when they fail, so that way you can learn from those mistakes for future and better implementation. So that's one that I can think of that was, pretty public disaster, if you will, and but they were able to learn from it and to get the system working again. So it's also, I think, a good rebound story.
Fantastic. All right, last question.
Yeah.
What resources are available out there? I mean, obviously, yes, consultants are available to support organizations, and the larger this implementation needs to be, obviously you need it's worth the investment in hiring support to guide that transformation process. Whether the company has an internal individual, perhaps, or an external company that's coming in to support it. I mean, there needs to be someone focused on that transition plan, that risk mitigation, all of that. But what other resources are out there? I mean, we talked about, mom and pops and small things, working from home, all these smaller transformations, and really understanding what change management is. Are there any resources out there? You're a professor.
I would say that before even looking into resources, the first thing that everyone really has to do is you have to have an appreciation for this. You have to have an appreciation for change.
Okay.
That doesn't mean you have to know everything that there is about that, like you mentioned. The plug that you put in there for consultants, such as myself. Where yes, there are organizational behaviorists and psychologists that are out there in industry. Yes, there are. And we're even teaching these things in academia now. There's at my alma mater at Purdue, they have an OBHR field, right? And so they're talking organizational behavior and human resources in the business school. So the first thing, like I said, is you got to have an appreciation and understand that this is important, right? Individual behaviors, corporate culture, it's important.
Don't downplay.
Don't downplay it. And then from there, like you said, there's a host of books that are out there, and some of the more, well-known psychologists and business organizational behaviorists that are out there, such as John Cotter and Kurt Lewin, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. There's so many that are out there that they've written books, they've written YouTube videos and whatnot. So I guess when I come back to the word appreciation, I mean, you got to be hungry. You got to be hungry to go find this information. You got to be hungry to go learn more about it. Is what you need to do. There's a plethora of resources that are out there: videos, schools and academia, books, heck, even like on social media, right? There's I'm on Pinterest and on Instagram, and every once in a while I will get a pop-up that talks about that gives me a good quote or gives me something to think about, right? Or teaches me something new about project management or process management. So just be hungry. It's out there. It may not find you, but you can find it if you are just hungry for it and you appreciate it and you take it seriously.
Well, and I think that's also great advice, really, to sit back and appreciate the effort that goes into a transformational change, because that's what's going to lead the individual to that self-awareness of whether we can do this on our own, whether this is a small enough change that we can figure this out, or if this is something where I'm not ready to handle this level of transformation on my own. We need an expert. We need someone who knows how to run these stakeholder analysis, to run this risk analysis, and then advise on whether or not it's worth it or not, or what this risk mitigation plan needs to be. Because when it is truly a small change, that's something that a lot of organizations can do. It may be as simple as we're changing our expense platform. I've participated in that type of change before, where you do the research, you find the platform you want to do, you have to train your employees on how to redo their expenses in this new way, or timekeeping platforms, those types of things.
Yes.
Those are IT changes that can have a significant effect if they go wrong, but at the same time, that stakeholder analysis within an organization is much smaller. That risk mitigation is not quite as devastating, although it could be. I mean, when you're talking about expenses and payroll, that could be a big deal. But some changes can be handled internally, whereas others that are larger, especially when we're talking about global organizations, if our office changes our payroll or our expense platform, that's fine. If, a giant global conglomerate changes their expense and payroll planning and the way they handle that, that's a larger transformation just by virtue of the size of the organization.
Yeah.
But when it comes to that change, really sitting there and having that awareness that you were talking about and understanding, okay, this is either something I can do, or this is something I know I require help. I require support. And that's where you come in.
I guess one final part too is that I wanted to highlight that too. To be a good change manager has nothing to do with being an extrovert or an introvert by any
Ooh,
means.
yeah.
To be a good change manager, in my belief, is that you have to appreciate and be a people person first, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what makes a good change manager. You have to know how to interact with people. You have to know how to engage with people. It doesn't matter, if you're. It doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter your gender. It doesn't matter, your East Coast, West Coast. It matters.
It's
Do you care about people, and are you genuine with people?
I think what you're trying to get to is it has less to do with IQ and more EQ.
Thank you. Right, something I had mentioned earlier: EQ, emotional intelligence. It does. It absolutely does. And as I've come to tell you many times, right? There's those 4 levels of emotional intelligence, right? And that first level is self-awareness, right? You
Mm-hmm.
got to be able to understand what are your own feelings in a situation, right? And how does a situation make me feel? To then moving all the way up to the 4th level, where you're able to control other people's emotions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is the highest form of emotional intelligence. And let me also say to our viewers out there, don't use EQ for bad. There's even ways you can use emotional intelligence for evil, if you will, right? And for manipulation and things like that. So, but having a strong EQ, that's what moves people. That's what
Mm-hmm.
gets people to buy into your messaging, right? When you can convince and can convey your thoughts and your sentiments into others.
Mm-hmm. And get their buy-in. I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
that's the goal, is to present this change in a way or in a fashion that it appears, or I won't say it appears, because I don't want to indicate that it's all a facade, but that they understand and see the benefit of it. Even if it's hard, even if it's a significant change, there's clearly a benefit. Otherwise, it wouldn't be happening.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people don't change, or organizations don't change for the worse just because. Yes, it may be initially there could be a honeymoon period where things are chaotic, or things don't work as they should, or it's a tough transition, or you've got people who are upset about the change. Obviously, those things can happen, but ultimately, the whole point of the transformation is to do something better, to improve upon some aspect. And I think what you're trying to say there is that in that 4th level of emotional intelligence is getting the ability to get others to buy into that change and convince them that this is the right thing to do and the best path forward.
Yeah. Yes.
Awesome. I think that brings us to the end of our discussion. It has been a fantastic discussion about
Oh,
transformational change.
thanks, Alan. Appreciate that. And again, if anyone's interested, you can always look us up on LinkedIn and whatnot. I'm always posting content and articles out there just to help bring that awareness and appreciation to others.
I will make sure that there is a link to your LinkedIn bio in our episode description.
Oh,
All
thanks.
right.
Appreciate that.
So, if anyone of our listeners or viewers out there has a suggestion for a topic or would like to be a guest on our show, I invite you to reach out to me at podcast@miebach.com. That's the best way to contact us. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to have you on the show. As always, thanks for listening to Speaking of Supply Chain. Please rate and review us on whatever podcast platform you prefer. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, YouTube Podcasts, and YouTube itself for our video content. Be sure to tune in next time.